Welcome to the Magic Minds podcast. Today's episode is with Steven Pressfield. Steven Pressfield is one of the greatest. He is a best-selling author many times over, and for a company that's dedicated to productivity and flow state, he may have written the most seminal book on the topic, The War of Art. This is a cult favorite amongst almost every creator I know, from writers to entrepreneurs to artists to anyone that has this inkling, this desire to create, but maybe a whole lot of resistance blocking you. The War of Art is for you, and Steven Pressfield is the person to talk to about it. So without further delay, let's get into my conversation with Steven in front of a live audience here in Venice Beach, California. It was a phenomenal, wide-ranging conversation, and I'm excited for you all to hear it. So let's get into it. This is the Magic Minds podcast. Without further ado, let's get into it with Dr. Pressfield.
Just want to say thanks, James, for having me. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks, Gil. I didn't recognize it back there.
Yes, thank you all for coming out. Oh, awesome. I've seen so many friends in the audience as well, and it is so fun to do these in person. I think something magical happens when it's in person and not just in a podcast studio. So let's, without building it up too much, let's see if some magic happens here. And I said Dr. Pressfield because you have an honorary PhD from the School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly. I'd love to start this conversation. So if people RSVP'd, if they looked Steven up, then you probably came across a book called The War of Art. Many of you have probably read it. It is a cult classic for all of the right reasons. It's an illuminating read. It's one of top 3 books I've ever read. It was 20 years ago when you published it, so we're not going to spend all of our time on War of Art, but that is something that I'm sure many people in this room, that topic and that book, I'm sure it's going to be a topic that we spend a decent amount of time on. But first,
you have questions? Will people be able to ask?
That's right. We'll do Q&A here in about 45 minutes. But before we get to War of Art, I would love to start in the School of Hard Knocks territory. And also, we're going to get into Daily Pressfield. Can you take us back to the beginning of your story? How many people here know Steven's story, his background? Okay, a few. How many people know the War of Art? Everyone in the room almost. Okay, so do you mind telling us a little bit about your background? Because I think it's just as fascinating as the War of Art.
Sort of the short version is that I was 52 before I got my first novel published, after starting at like 23, something like that. I don't know, it's kind of a little embarrassing to talk about this, but I've worked a bunch of jobs over in a lot of different places, kind of running away from writing. When I finally sort of turned the corner on that, it was still like another 20 years before anything actually, got published. So I'm from the school of you can get better, you can improve. It's like one of the things I say is that people now tell me that I'm a talent, but for 30 years they told me I was a bum. So you can get better, and the School of Hard Knocks is definitely a real thing.
I've heard you say before that you started writing in 1967, and your break came with Legend of Bagger Vance in 1995.
Yeah.
So that 30 years, not only is it not hyperbole, but when you just think about it, when I heard it said that way, 1967, 1995, it kind of broke for you. It really hammered home just not only how persistent and determined you were, but how long it takes for a household name that now for the last 20 years is a name that people around the world know. But for 30 years, like you said, you were just Well, tell us about those 30 years, because I want to learn about those 30
A
years.
story about Walter Matthau, the actor. Does anybody know who Walter Matthau is from The Odd Couple? And supposedly he was at a party somewhere talking to a young actor, and the young actor said to him, I just need that one break, that one great break. And Matthau started laughing. And he said, kid, it's not the one break, it's the 50 breaks. And one of the things that I have learned along this road is that you think you break through, and then you need another breakthrough and another breakthrough and another breakthrough and another breakthrough I've never had a moment when anything like turns a corner at once. Um, so, I mean, for me, just sort of the short version of this, my long passages, I wrote like 4 novels that never went anywhere, never got published, never got anywhere. And then I sort of, at that point, the last one that I did, I said to myself, I just can't do this again. I can't face this fucking scenario again, of however hard it works. So at that point, I said, well, why don't I stop writing novels and try to write screenplays? So I was in New York, I was driving a cab, and I came out here, and after like 5 or 6 years of going nowhere here, my agent teamed me up with he took me out to dinner, and he said, how about if I team you up with an older established writer? And you'll be like the junior member of this team, but at least you'll be getting work because the established writer is a name, da 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 da. He actually lives here in Venice. His name is Ron Shusett. He's the guy who did the first Alien and Total Recall and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so at that point, I actually, as a junior member of this team, started making money. Actually could pay the rent, and started learning in the Hollywood school, what a story is or something. So it wasn't, for the last 10 years or so, it wasn't total starvation. It was, at least working in the field of that sort of thing. So that's kind of the short version of that story.
It is such and you talk about it in your books of that with more detail of those 30 years of obscurity. Do you mind touching on, I think one of my, the parts that maybe is most fascinating, that I resonate with most? Some folks here in the audience might be on the other side of that rainbow where they've broken through. For many of us, we might be year 2 of that 30 years, where 30 years just sounds unbelievable to us, because did you feel like it was just around the corner? And then the other thing, so walk me through your kind of internal navigation, and then I would love for you to spend some time on, I think it was 6 years that you just had your typewriter in the trunk and you didn't take it out. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so first, do you mind just talking about, did you feel like it was around the corner?
I'm sort of a little embarrassed to kind of tell these things, but I guess you guys are here to hear this, so I'll try. The way it sort of started for me when I was like 22 or 23, I was working in advertising in New York, and I quit this job to write a novel. And I was married at the time, and my wife supported me, blah, blah, blah. And I got to the end of 2 years of writing this thing, and I absolutely choked. I was like that far from the end, and I had never heard the concept or the thought of resistance with a capital R, that bedevils all of us. But I just choked, I freaked out, I blew up my marriage, I blew up whatever it was. And so I wound up kind of falling out of the bottom of the middle class, in the sense that if I tried to get a job, like a white-collar job, the stink of defeat was on me so much that even in an interview, I was humiliated just to be in one of those things. So I wound up working the kind of jobs that all you need to have is a pulse to get the job, the oil fields or picking through it or that kind of thing. So through that time, after writing this first book and blowing it, I was so ashamed of myself in front of my wife, in front of myself, or whatever it was, that I kept my typewriter with me, but I never touched it, not even to write a letter, while I was working these various jobs. And because to me, the idea of sitting down to write was like the equivalent of, I don't know what, the most shameful painful thing he could possibly do. So that was kind of a period of wandering in the wilderness before I had a moment that I talk about in the War of Art, where I was in this $150 a month sublet apartment in New York, driving a cab, and you hit that sort of moment where you just you're freaking out yet again. And I thought, am I going to go out again another night and get drunk and chase women and do whatever stupid distractions I'm going to do for myself? And I thought, I just can't do this fucking thing one more time. So I pulled out the typewriter and sat down for a couple of hours, just torturing out some crap that wasn't anything at all, and just kind of threw it away. And at that point, I went back to do the dishes. For some reason, I found myself in the kitchen doing the dishes. And to my amazement, I found myself whistling. And I sort of realized that I had somehow turned a corner, and that this thing that I'd been running away from all the time, sitting down at the typewriter, because I thought it would be torture and hell again, now became a thing that I could see was going to support me on the soul level, that I found something that would keep me from being crazy. And at that time, I sort of felt like, if you asked me, is there any success on the horizon? I would have said, not in a million years. I had no thought of that at all. But just I found that just the act, of sitting down and trying to write something, made me sane. I sat down crazy and I got up singing. So, that's kind of what I'm talking before about. You think, oh, that's a breakthrough. Oh, wow, everything's going to change now. But of course it didn't, for years and years and years. But at least I was able to actually sit down and write.
When was that? About
1972, 73, 74, something like that. Yeah. Before everybody here was born.
And young Steven had another 20 years before, that and this quote unquote breakthrough that you talked about before, or that 1995 moment of making big, maybe in the commercial sense. It sounds like you had 20 years prior already just divorced from the sense of like, I need to do this for some commercial reason, of just recognizing I've been in a total fucking funk and then I'm whistling while cleaning the dishes because of that craft.
Yeah, so in a way, like I said, the last 10 years before that breakthrough, with the book, was, at least I was working in a field. I was working in the movie business. I will never tell you any of the titles of anything that I'm watching. I believe it'll be best. But the point is that, you're learning, right? You're in a field that you're working on. So, was something I wanted to say, I forgot what it was. Anyway, let's keep going.
You were at least getting paid. You were kind of in that parallel path, but at least getting steady work. Did you have the same kind of pep in your step, whistle with that work, or did you always feel like, okay, this is paying the bills, but it's parallel to where I really feel called?
No, I was enthusiastic about it, but I know what I meant to say was that moment with the washing the dishes and whistling was the result of something unconscious. It was not why it happened. I can't say, other than the passage of time and something that goes on inside you. And the same thing when I was working in the movie business. I was enthusiastic about what I was doing, but it wasn't really coming from my heart. It would think, well, let's do a detective story this time. Let's do a science fiction movie this time. Let's do this, and you're learning or something along the way. But it's not really coming, at least for me, from my real voice, whatever that was. And then with The Legend of Bagger Vance, at least the book, not the movie, which I hate. But
I like the movie. We've talked about this before, but I like the movie.
Well,
I might be one of the few, but I like it.
But for whatever reason, that book came really from me. Came from whatever that entity is. We've talked about this sort of stuff before. And every book since then has been the same way. So another corner was turned then but I have no idea why. It was on some other level of reality. That the only thing I can say is just putting in enough time, endless time, finally some tumbler ticks over, on some other level. And all of a sudden you can do what you couldn't do before.
Do you mind going deeper on that? I feel like that's an area I would love to spend time with you on, of just how it felt when you were writing, when you were creating it. So, you're talking about these things in a beautiful, subconscious, experiential way, that you wrote, and then you're whistling when you're cleaning the dishes, and you recognize, like, okay, whoa, something got unlocked, and then 10 years of writing movies, but do you mind saying your words again? It wasn't you. And then you, with The Legend of Bagger Vance, walk me through, like, super detail, if you wouldn't mind, what that felt like when you're writing it, and what you mean when you say, like, it wasn't you with the movies, and yet you were doing it.
It's interesting, James, because it's hard to put into words. When I had the idea to write the book of The Legend of Bagger Vance, and it just sort of came out of nowhere, like it just sort of seized me, and I went to my agent, my Hollywood agent, who was a good agent, and I told him, I got bad news and I've got worse news, and the bad news was the idea of the story, and the worse news was that it was a book. So the short version, instead of a movie, where he said to me, I've been busting my ass for you for years, trying to get you in this town where people know who you are. And now you're going to take however long it takes. People forget, a week here, we all know that. So, but I was just seized by this thing. So basically my agent fired me. And
Really?
I didn't care, I didn't care. I was just totally seized by this. And it just kind of, like they say, it came out of me like, without even thinking about it, I didn't really prepare it. And when I look back on it now, the structure of that story, the book, not the movie, it's a really weird structure, but it worked. And as I was doing it, I really knew this is it. The rubber has met the road. I've got traction. I didn't think anybody would like it. I thought it was a really dumb idea. A mystical golf novel is like the dumbest idea I can think of. And but I didn't care because it seized me. I wanted to, but I really, I was more amazed than anybody when it found, success.
That's such a great reflection point for any of us as creatives to work on something because of that intrinsic value, or the fact that we're just a conduit for it, regardless of some results that we are so hard trained to think about when we're creating so much of the time. Is there something you could have done to bring that moment earlier, 1985, 1982, or was it like, nope, it had to happen?
Great question, and I've thought about this because people have asked me that before, and I don't think there was anything. I don't think there was any shortcut for me. For me, not necessarily for anybody else, but for me. And I'm not even sure why. Again, I think we sort of put in the time, and the muse, I'm a big believer in the muse, watches over us, and when it's time to happen, she lets it happen, and knows sooner. And we don't have any control over that, at least I don't get it.
Is there something you could have done very easily in that phase of life where you would have missed the muse? Do you look back and say, like, I'm so glad I did X or Y because I would have missed it?
I was glad I did all of it when I look back on it. In some way it was necessary. I'm not sure how or why, but it was. It's an interesting line of question. Nobody's really thought to me about it. So,
Well, I'm just going off of what I'm fascinated by, and it seems like a natural question to say, like, okay, what changed in 1993 and 4 to allow for that season of 1995 to happen? And you always speak with so much humility, but there's something beautiful and simple of, no, it's not a anxious striving that can be done faster, better, more efficient. It's just letting it come through you. Maybe it's not anxious striving whatsoever.
Yeah, I know a lot of young people today, the pressure is on you to succeed right away. Kim Kardashian does a sex tape, and the next thing you know, she's super strong. So everybody thinks, well, what can I?
And my sex tape didn't do shit. So what does that say about that playbook? Maybe she's got way more talent. Yeah, I know. And but I can't tell if it's because of the art or because you're a friend.
Yeah, so there's a lot of pressure to find a shortcut or a hack or something like that. And I suppose some people do. It didn't work that way for me. And I don't.
But with you and that many best-selling novels, I wonder if even if you had found it, you have staying power. It might have taken till 52, but the staying power from and so Steven is actually better known for his fiction novels, and those sell way more numbers. But out of so many best-selling books, for me, The War of Art, Do the Work, Turning Pro, Daily Pressfield, these are catnip for me, and it's that staying power. People might, I don't know, get a shiny object and shake it around for 2 years, but not have the staying power that you have with the work that you've created. But so you don't feel like there are any shortcuts that can be had. And I think that's just so opposite of everyone else talking with microphones today.
I mean, the one really good thing I think about the long time that it took me to get anywhere was that it made me ask, and I've heard other writers say the same thing too, is why am I doing this? Because your family thinks you're crazy. Everybody you know sort of has this kind of pity on you. It's like, how delusionary is this guy? He's getting nowhere at all. So you have to ask yourself, I'm not doing it for the money because there's no money in it. I'm not doing it for recognition. I guess not because there's no recognition. And so it's kind of like what we've talked about Vedanta. You eventually say to yourself, I'm doing it just for the work itself, just for what it is, just for love of the game, like an athlete does it for the love of the game. And that's a great place to be coming from, because it doesn't wear out, it doesn't get old. It's hard to do because it's so easy to think, oh, I wish this would be a hit, or I wish, this one would turn the corner somehow. And of course, it almost never does. But it's great to know, and Rick Rubin talks about this too. One of the things he says is that you should never be attached, again, a Vedanta thing, to the outcome or something. If you're making an album like he does, with these groups, and they're thinking, oh, this has got to be a hit, this has got to be a hit. This is not where the good stuff comes from. I think it comes from, as he says, just from the love of the music and the love of the game. And so I believe that completely. I sort of had to come to that because, there was no success. Mm-hmm. So in a way, that was a good thing. Like it really was good.
I don't want to belabor the stories that you've told so many times before, but that personal history is so. That's where the meat is in so many ways for many of us that feel like we're wandering or feeling like, to what you just touched on, wondering why are we doing this, especially with the social pressure of the people we care about, loudly wondering why the hell are you doing that? What was that experience? I mean, you mentioned divorce. Like, it wasn't just like a parent casually doubting. It was like your life was being upended in various moments while you were like, I can't shake this craft that I'm called to.
Yeah. Well, like I say, for me, during those hard years, shame was a huge part of it,
Yeah.
I was just so ashamed of myself that I felt like I've got myself in the bottom of this paper bag, and the only way I'm going to get out of it is to write my way out of it, So, there was no plan B that was going to get me out of it. If I took a job, any job you could imagine, And even if I succeeded at it, I would still be at that place of just hating myself. The only way out of it was through this, to write my way out of it. So as long as was able to keep doing it, I felt encouraged by that, and I felt like I am getting better little by little. And, you always have little incremental successes along the way that kind of keep you going, or you have another idea and that gives you hope, maybe this one will take me somewhere. So it wasn't quite as dark as I'm saying, but it was a tunnel that I knew I just had to go all the way through that tunnel to get out the other side. There was no plan B. There was no off-ramp. There was no other way to do it.
10 years ago, I think culturally there was this amazement around something like the young college dropout tech billionaire. And I think a lot of people tried that, and
you've done something like that, right, James?
It was an inspiration of like, wow, I'm young and I can do this thing, and I did follow that path and had some success in doing that. But I feel like we are rotating in a healthy way towards someone like you being the cultural mascot, where it is sticking with something and having it take its time, but also not forcing it, not attaching ourselves to needing some result. I mean, that was all results. 10 years ago, it was like, just come up with an app idea. It doesn't matter. I mean, the whole fucking like playbook was minimum viable products to try out a bunch of different things so that you can like automaton build a $1 billion company. And your story is more of just a relief valve of the soul of a craft that might go nowhere in some commercial sense and might go nowhere from even a social peer perspective for 30 years until 50s, or maybe nowhere at all, ever. But this muse, which I want to talk about,
Let me just say one thing, James. That is the writer's life or the artist's life, right? The dancer's life, the actor's life. How many people, 1 in 10,000, break through to actually get somewhere, or 1,000, something like that. And most of us wind up, if we can stay in the field in one way or another, if you can't be an actor, maybe you can produce something, or you can be in somewhere, or if you can't be a professional golfer, you can be you can work in golf in some way or another. So that is the entrepreneur's life, right? It's the artist's life. It's the athlete's life. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
That'd be crazy to want to do it, or be driven for whatever crazy reason.
Once you see behind the veil, I think in the beginning it can be total just ego engineering, or this is going to be amazing in 2 years, and then you see behind the veil and you're like, fuck, this is really hard.
Yeah.
One concept that we've talked about and you touched on just then is the concept of work without attachment is worship. And the spiritual aspect of your work, not only Legend of Bagger Vance, that's, for those that don't know, Legend of Bagger Vance is an homage to the world's most famous poem, the Bhagavad Gita. I would love to know, by the way, as a side, you told me this once, but I forget, what about the Bhagavad Gita spoke to, no one in the West has written about the Bhagavad Gita. How did you come across it? What spoke, and this is going to be a fun for, I see some folks from the Venice Vedanta Club in Paris that we talk about the Gita all the time. But yeah, what about that text spoke to you?
Well, one thing you learn when you're a screenwriter is you're always looking for something you can steal. Some structure that, it's Romeo and Juliet, it's, Xenophon's Analysis, something you can steal.
Yeah.
And so the Bhagavad Gita, for those of you guys who don't know about this, is an ancient Indian, they call it the Hindu Bible. Gandhi supposedly used the principles in it to free India. And it's really a mentor-protege story. I'll bore you for a minute with what it is. It's the great warrior Arjuna on the eve of a battle where the chariots are lined up across from each other, looks across at the enemies on the other side, and he sees people that he knows, teachers and kinsmen and so forth. And he turns to his charioteer and he says, drive my chariot out between the two armies and stop. His charioteer does that. And at that point, Arjuna lays down his arms. He says, I see no point in fighting this war. I quit. His charioteer happens to be Krishna. In other words, God in human form. You can see why this is a scripture, right? So at this point, Krishna kind of reads Arjuna the riot act. And he says, stand up, get your book, pick up your weapons. And then he says, I'm going to teach you this day everything that you need to know. It becomes kind of a spiritual treatise about, interrupt me, James, if you want to.
No, it's a short read. It's like it's a 700 verse poem. It's very short, but it is this dialogue between this. I mean, talk about a war of art. It's such a great dialogue for any creator to read.
So he talks about karma. He talks about previous lives. He talks about duality, attachment, non-attachment, all these kind of things, yoga and
duty.
Yeah. And another great section of it is called The Field and the Knower, which is like quantum physics from 3,000 years ago. Anyway, so I was very familiar with this.
How were you familiar with it? Because so few people are familiar with it.
And once I started reading it again, I started reading it in different translations, and because it's so short and because it's so un-Western. One of the aspects of this story is Krishna says to Arjuna, kill the enemy, kill them all, as opposed to the Western thing of life is precious. And as he says, you won't be killing them because I have already killed them, but do your duty. So, and I could never quite understand that. I still can't understand it. But in any event, one day I just thought, this is a great structure. It's a great mentor-protege story. It's a great thing where the godlike character appears like Jesus as a servant, as a charioteer. And so I thought, well, let's make it a golf story. A troubled warrior, a troubled golf champion, and instead of his charioteer, it's his cat. And there's a lot of reality to that in the real world, So anyway, that's kind of, as a screenwriter, you're always looking for something to steal, and this was a great thing.
Well, and a big part of it is duty, and the whole first chapter, which is, as a creator, it's my favorite chapter in the Gita, because the whole first chapter is this. He's the most famous warrior prince in the land, phenomenal archer, and the whole first chapter, after this battle's been. It's 13 years in the making. The biggest battle of this great civil war is about to happen, and this warrior prince is like, Krishna, take me to the middle to survey both sides, acting like he's trying to survey both sides. Gets to the middle of the battlefield and has this epic meltdown, just complete breakdown. And he's like, I can't do this. We shouldn't be doing this. And the whole first chapter is him taking what's called the spiritual bypass, where he, in a really savvy way, is trying to get out of his duty. And he's not like shirking the duty of like, no, this ain't for me, I can't do it. He's like, we shouldn't be doing this, Krishna. We should be studying philosophy in the forest, in solitude. We shouldn't be killing anyone. And Krishna is this symbolic embodiment of God, which is in many ways like you as an encourager or reading the War of Art is like, you'd think you'd be like, yeah, you figured it out, Arjuna, and yes, let's go study philosophy. And instead, as a spiritual text, which is so non-Western, Krishna is basically, in not so many words, is like, what the fuck are you talking about? You are a warrior, and you've been given a righteous war, and you're trying to back out of it to let unrighteousness rule the land. I mean, it's like kind of like Lion King, just Simba being like, hey, I'm going to chill in the jungle while everyone he loves suffers and dies. This spiritual component of your work is so, it's everywhere. The muse is capitalized. You have resistance is capitalized. What is just to hit it directly on the head, what are your personal, actually, I'll give you some contextual. You said this, so I think it's a fair topic to approach. You said when you were kids, you said this I can't remember where you said it, but you said when we were kids, we thought God is dead and it's up to us now. And there's only one dimension. There's only here and now, and yeah, I think you said, to paraphrase it, but now in life, I'm like, holy shit, there are way more dimensions. God is not dead. There is something way bigger happening. Can you walk us through your personal spiritual metaphysics?
Okay.
And that path, maybe that path from God God doesn't exist anymore, to where you are today.
Whatever spirituality I have or believe in comes from the challenges of a writer, or any artist, right? And the question that you have to ask yourself when you've been working on this for a while is, where do ideas come from? Because it's very clear, the idea for a movie, the idea for a book, or whatever, it's very clear when you're working in it that they're not coming from you. You're not having that idea. The idea is coming from some other place, and so that makes you humble right away, and it certainly makes you wonder, what is that other place? And then when I first was writing the first book that I ever actually finished writing, I had a mentor named, not really a mentor, he's a friend. He was a writer about 30 years older than me, named Paul Rank. And I used to, every morning I would go down and have coffee with him in his little camper shell pickup that he lived in. And he introduced me to the idea of the muse, of, the Greek goddess conception of this other dimension where ideas come from. And I'll get into it in a little more detail here, the risk of boring you guys. Who knows who the muses are? Does that ring a bell at all? Okay. In Greek mythology, the muses were 9 sisters, the daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, which means memory. And their job was to inspire artists. And there was a muse of dance, Terpsichore, a muse of music, Calliope, and so on and so forth. And kind of the image of the muse that you see in art would be something like Beethoven at the piano, and this goddess-like figure, sort of half ethereal, kind of whispering in his ear, like, so that's kind of the whole idea of a higher dimension, or some dimension that we can't touch or feel or anything, communicating to us one way or another. And Paul, my friend who was teaching me this stuff, told me that every day before he sat down to work, he said a prayer to the muse. And the prayer was the invocation of the muse from Homer's Odyssey, the first 20 lines of the Odyssey. And he typed it out for me, and I still have it. And the gist of that prayer was that what the writer is saying is, Goddess, help me, tell the story, tell it through me, So the other thing about the muse,
How old were you when you started to pay attention to this?
35 or something like that.
Different way of working.
Yeah. The other thing, at least the way, is that you can't command the muse. You can't make her come. You can't bribe her. You can't beg her. You can't cajole her. The only thing you can do is invoke her. Prayer, the invocation of the muse. So that sort of is the undergirding of whatever spirituality I have, the idea that there is a higher dimension, and that we're trying to reach up to it. And that it is, the ancient Greeks believed that the gods penetrated this, that they would be here right now in this room. Like if you read the Iliad, the gods are on the battlefield all the time, right? They're up on Olympus, Venus, Achilles' mother, is begging Zeus, please save my son, etc., etc., etc. And I definitely believe that whether it's that anthropomorphized version of it, of, Apollo, Aphrodite, so on and so forth, or whether it's some kind of quantum mysterious force, that it does penetrate this dimension. And that our job, I think, as artists, but also as human beings, is to be aware of it and be open to that. And And I'm sure if we really could see what was going on in this room here right now, like what an analogy I've heard a lot is, as we're sitting here right now, there's radio stations, the vibrations are passing through our body, right? All from our cell phones, our phone calls going on, TV is in the air, blah, blah, blah. But we can't pick it up because we're not tuned. We don't have that, that radio, but it's there. And in the spiritual sense, right? Yogananda would say, you can, the great wise men are still here, wise women are still here, and you can still talk to them. They're here every minute. So that's kind of my, whatever it is. That's spirituality.
I love how you also whenever you are pinned into a corner, you don't try to define it to fit some conversational like Q&A. You leave it just so open-ended because if you call it God, as the adage goes, a God defined is a God confined. If this is this infinite frequency to tap into, then trying to define it with 7 words kind of defeats the purpose. Right. Yeah. I want to open up for questions after diving into a few. I want to bring up a few things from the Daily Pressfield that I'd love for you to give a little more color on, and some of my favorite pages. And the reason I'm asking some of these types of textural questions that aren't in your books is because so much of the nuts and bolts of daily creation, long-term, sustainable, creative output is in the Daily Pressfield. So buying this book, if you didn't get a copy, buying this book is this daily reminder, and then it's such a great kind of 365 how-to. It's true. So it's, the book has a lot of those nuts and bolts. Do you want to, while I bring up one of my favorite passages, do you want to give a little bit of background on what made you want to create this book?
The idea, Ryan Holiday, if you guys know who he is, kind of said to me one day, "You've got so much stuff, you've read so much content, you should put it in a 365-day format, because it could really help people." And so I also thought that I wanted to do something. People come to me a lot of times and say, I've got a book in for a deal of you, right? And say, well, how do I write? So I thought this 365-day format would be a great thing for any kind of artist, because so the book sort of tries to start at day one, and it's all about our own tendency to sabotage ourselves and how to get around that, And it sort of would take you from day one to day 365 and encourage you along the way. So that's why I thought that format, that daily devotional format, would be a good thing to get some of this information out there.
Talk about a spiritual pretext of how to avoid self-sabotage. God, that's a sermon we could all use. One of the pages that I wanted to get some more color from you on is in the beginning of the book. It's day 7. It's self-doubt can be an ally. This is because it serves as an indicator of aspiration. It reflects love of something we dream of doing and desire to do it. If you find yourself asking yourself and your friends, am I a real writer? Am I a real artist? I almost get emotional thinking about this. Am I a real writer? Am I a real artist? Chances are you are. Do you mind telling us a little more about that first sentence? Self-doubt can be an ally.
I'll say this about self-doubt. Almost always when I start a project, a new book, let's say, I am crippled with self-doubt for at least the first year. And in fact,
that basically sounds like a lie. It's so hard to believe.
True. I figured it out. I mean, every day I look at the page or I look at myself and I say, "Is anybody gonna give a shit right now?" I mean, who are you to, But I'm a believer that that's really a good sign. And in fact, I would say if I'm not crippled by self-doubt on a project, something's wrong. Now, here's the dynamic behind that, in my opinion. the concept of resistance with a capital R it's from the war of art, is that resistance is our own tendency to self-destruct. And resistance is this intelligent force that knows when we're onto something good. And so the better the idea, the more important it is to our evolution as artists, the more resistance we're going to feel to. So in other words, big resistance. If we're riven with self-doubt, with laziness, with fear, with whatever, that's a good sign because it shows that the devil doesn't want us to do this thing. So when I'm feeling a lot of self-doubt, I have to tell myself this. It's not really obvious. I have to kind of talk myself into it. I say to myself, that's a good sign. If I didn't have any doubt, that would be a bad sign. So self-doubt is good. Fear is good. All of those negative things are a great sign. I'll say one other, this is another analogy that I sometimes use. If we imagine a tree in the middle of a sunny meadow, the instant that tree appears, a shadow appears, right? Equal and opposite, equal, same size. The tree is our dream. The book we want to write, the movie we want to make, whatever it is. The shadow is resistance. So the big tree, there's a big shadow. So if we are feeling that big shadow in the form of self-doubt, fear, and so on and so forth, even though we can't see it, there's a big tree there. That big tree is our dream, our work, whatever it is. It shows us that it's worthwhile. So we just have to find a way to gird our loins and face it.
That's why I love this last line. It's, if you find yourself asking yourself, am I a real writer? Am I a real artist? Chances are you are, because that shadow can obviously be quite daunting, but it's such a beautiful expression of just asking yourself, am I a real version of this?
Yeah, because that's self-doubt, right? You wouldn't ask yourself that if you were confident. Like when somebody comes up to me and says, I'm a writer, I'm working on something that's really great. I'm really good, I love to do it, and I'm really banging it out. It's very clear to me that this person is totally doing that. That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
The real writer should be neurotic, conflict-ridden, and his hands should be shaking and quaking in the corner.
If overconfidence is antithetical to good work, according to that perspective, what are the other things that can sabotage you that might seem healthy?
That's a great question. I mean, one for sure is perfectionism. When you are working on a page and you start noodling on one paragraph, and then pretty soon you're noodling on one sentence, and the whole day is going by and you've written 3 sentences. Perfectionism is resistance that you might say, oh, this is a great thing. Another thing, a form of perfectionism is when you get to the end of a project, if you go, well, I can't really submit it yet. I can't really show it to anybody because it's got to be absolutely perfect. I don't want, I used to have, I had an agent in my younger days, and he asked me towards the end of something, he says, where are you in this thing? I said, I'm close. He said, close is good enough. Give it to me. Because he understood, don't be a perfectionist. Another thing is research or preparation. Is another thing that we feel like, oh, I got to really prepare. I got to really learn. I got to study this thing. Bullshit, The point is you start on research I was working on a book a few years ago called The Lion's Gate. And it was about the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, the 6-Day War. And I had gone over to Israel and I had like 400 hours of audio tape from interviewing pilots and so on and so forth. And so when I got home, I thought, well, I'm going to be really responsible about this. I'm going to be like an academic guy, and I'm going to transcribe every hour of that thing. And then when I've got it all together, and so I was doing that for like 3 months. And I was getting absolutely nowhere. I was totally depressed. And I was saying to myself, well, then just write if I get that. So it worked. And yeah, So the idea of being prepared and having research and all that sort of stuff seems like a good thing, but a lot of times it's just resistance. We're afraid to actually face the music and sit down and do it. So we noodle around and backward.
You touched on it implicitly before, but attachment to an outcome.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Is that, what is your relationship with it? Your deliberate relate. It sounded like your career kind of took off when you, as you've noted before, it's like you kind of quit.
Totally believer of Rick Rubin's idea that you cannot be, or Danzo's idea that you can't be attached to the outcome, because when we can really get deep on this. I mean, you kind of flip this one out there, Danzo, for work without attachment is worship. That's a hugely deep. We could spend days on that, right?
Yeah.
Weeks on that. But the gist of that saying is that when we work with attachment to an outcome, we're working out of our ego. And we're saying, oh, this has got to be a hit, I need the money, my wife is driving me crazy, but gotta have, and nothing good ever came out of the ego, But if we can just say, I love this thing, I just got to do it. It's crazy. Nobody else is going to like it, but I love it. I've got to do it. Now we're working out of the soul, self. And that's where good things come from. So that's another big thing. To have an attachment to the outcome, it's human. It's really hard not to do it, but it's fatal.
And it sounds like some of your best work has come when you're like, no one's going to, there's no fruit is going to come from this.
Absolutely. The best things, the most successful things I've done, I thought were totally uncommercial, that nobody would be interested in them, but I just wanted to do them anyway. And to my amazement, they turned out to be commercial.
Yeah, that phrase of work without attachment is worship comes from my favorite Indian philosopher that we've talked about, A. Parthasarathi. And it's in his dissection of the Gita, it's all about, basically two things. You're not who you think you are. That's kind of Krishna's message. And two, the fruits of your action are not yours and will impede your ability to act if you're only thinking about that. Well, thank you so much, Steven, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.